What has been the story of Eagles camp? We are 1 week in to camp opening up. We are less than a week away from their first preseason game, John. What would you say the story is thus far of the Doug Peterson era 1 week in?
Well, I think it's the physicality of training camp and the fact that the Eagles are hitting, and what comes with hitting is injuries. And all of a sudden, they're starting to crop up. There was a very, very scary moment today when Ryan Mathews went down after a low hit by Jalen Mills. So some of the offensive players, Zach Ertz specifically, he got hit low by Rodney McLeod the other day. He spoke about it a bit today. And that's what happens. Anytime you have these live periods, things start to get a little testy, and there's some anger built up, and you're starting to see it. But I think Doug Peterson likes that, enjoys it, and he brings that old school mentality back to Philadelphia.
Seems that depending on what position you play, some like it, some don't.
Yeah, I mean, generally the big guys love it because they love hitting people, and that goes for both the offensive and defensive lines for the most part. Sometimes when you're a receiver, and you got a missile like Rodney McLeod coming at you, who's a very old school, intimidating safety as far as the way he hits, you can have a different viewpoint and probably kind of miss Chip Kelly, at least from that aspect, where there was no tackling to the ground. But, you know, it looks like the Eagles dodged a bullet with Ryan Mathews because he's going to be fine, according to the team, and he's going to be day-to-day moving forward. I couldn't imagine he's going to be on the practice field in the next week or so. They'll probably shut him down for a little bit. And he had two potential concussions today with Ertz and Marcus Smith. Ertz was cleared, but Marcus Smith had got a concussion, and he's in the NFL protocol now.
Zach Ertz, one of the guys that also, I guess, was it a concussion that he ended up getting checked for?
Yeah, he was checked for it, but he was cleared, so he does not have a concussion. So that part of it was good. And obviously Marcus was checked, and he did have a concussion, so he's got to go through the bigger hurdles to get back on the practice field. But you can just see what can happen when you start banging heads, and all of a sudden concussions pop up, knee sprains. Mike Martin went down with a knee injury. We have to keep an eye on that. So there's a lot of nicks and bruises now that we're a week plus into training camp, and that's going to happen. And it's better to happen early in August than September. Right. So you're not going to get too concerned.
So then, you don't want to make this a Peterson versus Kelly thing, but obviously Kelly's practices were very light. They weren't hitting. They were, almost like flag football out there. And I suggest that, look, it worked for Kelly. I kind of likened him to a fad, okay? He was the hot fad for a while. One summer, you're the hottest fad. The next summer, you're kind of somewhere in the middle. And by the third summer, no one knows what you are anymore. And that's kind of what Kelly ended up doing. His practices, they worked for a little while. So I don't know that there's an indictment on either guy here on what's right and on what's not. But the last 2 years, John, I think they stumbled down the stretch that maybe they just didn't have that physicality when you need the physicality. And that's where you get that is in these hot August days, and that carries into December.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to both ways of doing it. It's not like there were no injuries. If you remember, Chip's first year, Jeremy Maclin went down with a non-contact injury with the ACL, and Travis Long had ACL injuries both years. So it's not like you're going to legislate injuries. Coaches realize you can't do that. Things are going to happen. Maybe some of what we saw today, concussion issues, are less likely to happen. You're certainly not going to eliminate it. Because somebody could get a concussion diving for a football if their head hits the turf and they get wrong that way. So it's tough to eliminate them. As far as Chip goes, I think, I don't know if it was the toughness aspect of it as much as the defense wearing down every single season because they were on the field so much. I think more at the beginning of the year, Mike, you would see the Eagles would struggle early tackling, and then it would get better from there. And that's part of it. I mean, you have to practice something to get good at it. I mean, that's just common sense. And if you don't practice tackling, well, you're probably going to struggle until you get used to it. And I think that's more than anything what happened with Chip Kelly.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Couple guys back in practice today, Brandon Brooks and Ryan Mathews, although Mathews had to leave early, so he was somewhat limited at practice today. But Brooks seemed like he was okay and wasn't really hampered by anything.
Well, they were both limited. They both only worked in individual drills. They didn't put Brandon in team drills. Stefan Wisniewski was still handling the first-team right guard in all the team action. But Brandon was fine after practice. He just said they're moving him along slowly, and he'll continue to increase the workload. So everything's all good from his perspective, and he'll slowly get back into the starting lineup. As for Mathews, Doug didn't even know he left practice early. So it's just, who knows with Ryan Mathews? I mean, he's out there. He looks fine. He looks good, and then all of a sudden he's not out for the entire practice. So I think he's going to be somebody you have to keep an eye on basically every day, because history is what it is. History is history, and he's got a real difficult time staying on the field. It doesn't seem like he had a tweak of the ankle injury or anything of that nature, but for some reason he left practice early.
Yeah, and, he's a tough guy. I like Mathews as a talent. I liked him last year. I would always kind of say he's better than Murray. They got to go. And this was back in, preseason. He seemed like he was standing out. But you just can't trust this guy.
No, you can't. Yeah, and that's the problem. Nobody questions his talent. He's a tremendously talented guy by far.
So what's his deal? Is
running back the Eagles had.
Is he like aloof? Is he not passionate? I mean, doesn't care, or is he just a guy who's fragile?
Well, he's very aloof, but I don't know if that, he doesn't like talking to the media, and when he does, he's one of those guys who generally has his eyes down. He just doesn't enjoy it. But I don't know if that automatically you can jump to the conclusion he doesn't care or he doesn't try, because I think when he's on the field, I do think he gives the proper effort. So it comes down to guys. There's certain guys that are injury prone, and he's one of them. And it generally is. With Sam, I always look at it. People talk about Sam Bradford when you tear the two ACLs, or even Travis Long before he got cut. He tore 3 ACLs. At one point, at some point, you say these guys are just unlucky. But with a guy like Mathews, it's always something different. So one day it's an ankle, next day it's a knee. It's been a groin. You go back to his days in San Diego. And some guys are just injury prone, and that's been him to this point in the NFL. He played one season where he basically played 16 games in San Diego, and he was spectacular. But as you mentioned, you can't count on him, and that's just where the Eagles are with Ryan Mathews.
No doubt, yeah. And I like Mathews a lot, and it just I worry about relying on him. And what about Wendell Smallwood? Is he a guy that could carry the load? I mean, is he a guy that if you said, I give you the ball 20 times in some capacity, 15 carries, 5 catches, or something like that, is he that type of back right now? Do you look? He's hurt too, so it's hard to get a read.
Yeah, he's out with a quad injury right now, but he was here early in camp, and it looks like he's coming on. He's a natural runner. I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think he can handle it from that aspect. He's not a big guy. He's 5'9", but he's built very well, very compactly, and sometimes that can help you because you kind of get lost in the weeds behind the big offensive lineman. I think his issues are going to be catching the football, and even more so than that, pass protection. Because to play in this league, you have to be able to pick up the blitz if you're a running back. And In college, not picking on Wendell, but there are a lot of guys who aren't asked to do it that much.
Don't you dare pick on that West Virginia offense.
And he wasn't asked to do it much, and he's not very good at it at this point. And that's a hill almost every young running back in this league has to find a way to climb over. And right now, he's not very good at it. And he needs more reps. So obviously the quicker he can get back, the quicker they can get him up to speed in that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that offense that they run at West Virginia, he probably fit better in a Chip Kelly offense.
Probably, and that's the way college football is going, and that's what's so frustrating to NFL scouts and NFL coaches, because so many programs at the college level have gone, whatever you want to call it, zone read, spread offense, air raid offenses. They're always trying to spread the football field, and it affects a lot of people. It affects the progressions of the quarterbacks. They're not very good at that. The offensive linemen aren't used to holding their blocks, and they're not very good at that when they get here. And the running backs aren't very good in pass protection. So it affects a whole host of positions by the way college teams do things. And the NFL has shown no indication, no inclination that they want to go in that direction. So at some point, it's going to reach a crux where something has to change at some level, either the college level or the pro level.
Hey, I want to ask your opinion on this. If I was to say to you, and any player on the field, from Cox all the way down to the 90th man out there, a guy that you said, man, I'm watching this guy, he's going to have a big year. He's just out there, and he looks like a different player.
Well, I think the best player, and he wasn't there today because he was excused for a family funeral, but Rodney McLeod has been as advertised on defense, and he's an old school safety. He can hit, he can cover. He can play single high. He can drop in the box, and he has been all over the field. I think he had a 4-day streak of interceptions before he missed today, and he's just been spectacular. So that looks like a heck of a free agent signing.
Well, let me stop you there then. So why is he a guy who was an under the radar, pickup? Why isn't he a guy that more people knew about?
Because he's short, and measurables are big in the NFL. That's the reason he came into this league as an undrafted free agent. And it could be an issue down the field. You're going to see occasionally a big receiver. You get one of these 6'3", 6'4" receivers that can high point the football, and he's going to have some trouble with that. But if you look at his entire game and how effective he is and how well-rounded he is, and that's the one thing we kind of talked about yesterday with Jim Schwartz. He was complaining about his entire defense except the safeties, because Malcolm, before he went down with his hamstring injury, and Rodney, they were playing so well.
Okay, was there another guy that it sounded like you were going to expand on what you were saying before I so rudely asked that question? Was there something else you were adding to McLeod, or was there another guy that fits that bill?
Well, offensively, I kind of intimated yesterday, it's Burton, and Doug even mentioned it today when he talked about young players that have surprised. He's just been really, really good, and it's interesting because that's shaping up as the Eagles' deepest position. Obviously, Ertz has been tremendous, and he's going to be the starter. Selleck's just sort of the yeoman guy you count on that can block and catch passes, but they're going to have to find a way to get Burton on the field because he creates mismatches, and he can play all over. You put him in the slot. They've used him outside the numbers. He's beaten cornerbacks. He's making one-handed catches. He's been a really, really good player offensively for them, and I think they're going to have to find some packages to get him on the field.
That would be, any addition skill position-wise, I think, to this team. Let me ask you about some of the guys. I know Mathews got dinged up today, but how about Nelson Aguilar? We had a poll up at 97.3 ESPN on Twitter asking about which guy will have a breakout season, And the last we checked, he was winning that poll by a small margin. A lot of people seem to be liking what they're seeing from Nelson Aguilar. You're there every day. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't want to disappoint people, but I'm not seeing it to this point. And I thought he was making great strides in the offseason. Then obviously he got into the legal troubles. I don't know if that sent him back mentally. You still see the inconsistency, dropping the football occasionally. And I think it's pretty clear, and Doug mentioned today, that Ruben Randall, how good he's been, he's going to sort of drift atop the depth chart along with Jordan Mathews. And then I think it's a fight between Aguilar and Givens to be sort of the deep threat on this team. And right now I think Chris is playing better. And I also think Sam Bradford's more comfortable with Chris Givens. They sort of have a rapport from their days together in St. Louis. So, Nelson almost has to play better than he did last season. I would say Pro Football Focus rated 107 wide receivers that played enough last year to be rated. Nelson Aguilar was 107th, dead last. That's how poorly he played as a rookie. He almost has to be better than that, and I think he will be. But if you're counting on Nelson Aguilar, you're going to have a very, very long season.
Second best, I guess we all assume Matthews. Second best receiver on this team will be who?
Ruben Randall. I would argue. As far as catching the football, he's the best receiver on this team. He's got better hands than Jordan. But Jordan has always been more reliable than Ruben was in New York. Sort of has those days where, for whatever reason, he kind of drifts and runs bad routes. I think that'll continue. But talent-wise, I think he's the best receiver they have. And I think certainly hands-wise he's the best receiver they have. So, and Doug even mentioned it today. So we always talk about what Peter King said last week. Well, Doug's playing some poker if he's going to get rid of Ruben Randall, because he talked today about how good he was.
I agree. I mean, I think he's got to be one. If they keep, 5 or 6 receivers, unless there's somebody that's a total sleeper that we're missing, and I know that he was asked about Caleb Jones and P.T., Paul Turner, Hunter Sharp, some guys like that. I can't imagine one of those guys beating Ruben Randall out.
No, it's not going to happen.
But is there one of those guys that might make the team?
Well, I think Paul Turner's been the best. And Caleb Jones is the one guy. He stands out physically because he is just a 6'3" kid, big wide receiver, athletic, can get down the football field. But like a lot of young guys, he's very inconsistent. He's made a great play. He made the play of training camp with a one-handed catch, but he'll also drop 2 or 3 balls almost every practice. Whereas Paul Turner, and Doug mentioned him, Doug singled him out today. He's been the best of the rookie receivers from a consistency standpoint. And he plays a lot of slot. He's not nearly as big. But they mix and match, and he's also played outside the numbers. So he's been the best of those rookie names you mentioned. That's not to say, though, that if Caleb Jones plays well in the preseason, in the actual games, and he proves to be sort of a game day player instead of a practice player, because he's so impressive physically, I could see him sneaking on the back end of this roster. But none of this is going to affect Ruben Randall. Ruben Randall is worlds ahead of those guys.
Yeah, and then Chris Givens, as you mentioned, he's got the speed and he's got the lineage there with Sam Bradford, where I think those two guys, specifically Givens, he came here specifically to reunite with Sam Bradford. He really values what Sam Bradford brings as a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, they had, as I said, they had a good rapport when they were together in St. Louis, and they'll try. He certainly brings something to the team they haven't had, because he does. You have to pay attention to him because he can run. And if you have somebody like that, even though he's not the most well-rounded receiver, it's not like you can say as a defense, all right, just let him go, don't pay attention to him, because he will run right by safety. So that will help them, I think, because at the bare minimum, as I said, you have to respect his ability to stretch the field. And in theory, even if he's not catching a ton of passes, that's going to help guys like Zach Ertz underneath to get more space. So I think Chris Givens is going to be a key part of this team, even if he's not catching a ton of footballs every week.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. Got the Hall of Fame game on Sunday night. No Aaron Rodgers, it looks like. The Colts and the Packers, Luck might not play in that game as well. But finally, the kickoff of the NFL season is here. We know the Eagles, John, next Thursday night. It looks like we finally, this is really the kickoff here. And but one thing is for sure, while we're talking about a game starting on Thursday, the Cowboys still don't have an answer at backup quarterback, do they?
No, they don't. And
are they getting any closer?
I'm not sure they had an answer before Kellen Moore got hurt, but Jerry Jones would have told you that they did. And that's one of you would think they learned from their mistakes last season and when Tony went down. But, hey, it's difficult. I'm not going to be too hard on them because if you lose your starting quarterback in this league, you're in trouble. So basically all you're hoping for is a guy that can keep you in games and give you a chance to win them in the fourth quarter. And, hey, Matt Castle did that a lot for them. And they were in position to win games, but they couldn't win them.
Well, anytime you lose your guy for a long-term period of time, you're in trouble. But you got to get a guy that can keep you afloat for 2, 4, 5 games when your starter comes back.
And that's what you want with a Drew Stanton, who in my estimation would be the best backup quarterback in football. And that's what you want. You want a guy who, if he's got to play 3 or 4 weeks, can keep your head above water. But it's easier said than done. It's really difficult. And that's why wherever Nick Foles signed, and he ended up obviously reuniting with Andy Reid in Kansas City, he was going to be one of the best backup quarterbacks in football immediately. And it's not that he's that good. It's just that there's a dearth of quarterbacks in this league, and you can't even find 32 good starters. So math alone tells you there aren't very many good backup quarterbacks.
No, and the Eagles are hoarding them all, right? They got 3 guys on their team that people think can play quarterback, although some people think 2 of the 3 can't play, and you don't know what to think about Wentz. But it shows you the fine line between guys that can and cannot play in this league. John McMullen covers the league, 20 years covering the NFL nationally, and 2 years now over at 97.3 ESPN.com on that Eagles beat, where he will be Thursday night, Lincoln Financial Field, Eagles and Bucks. We'll be breaking it down next week here on the Sports Bash. Enjoy the weekend, pal.
You too. Thanks, Mike.